Today we're going to learn about completing the square. Let's say we have a problem like this. Solve 5x squared minus 25x plus 14 equals 0 by completing the square. So before we get started, let's first go over what completing the square is. Completing the square is like factoring and like the quadratic equation. It's another way to solve quadratics. When you use factoring, you convert it to factor form. When completing the square, you convert it to vertex form from general form. And factoring converts it from general form to factor form. So, when we start completing the square, we have to first break this equation down into two parts. It's not two binomials, but the two parts are ax, which is ax squared, which is 5x squared. Whoops, let's get a different marker. Which would be 5x squared, and bx in one group. So 5x squared minus 25x in one group. Let's put parentheses around them, which you have to do. And then the c term goes in a different group. So plus 14 equals 0. Now, what completing the square means is once you break it down into these two parts, the a and the b terms with their coefficients, the x squared and x terms with their coefficients, and the c term, you have to make this part a perfect square trinomial. But before we do that, we have to get x squared by itself. So what that means is that we have to divide both the a term and the b term by the a value. So divide 5 with 5 and 25 with 5. Or negative 25 with 5. So we get 5 divided by 5 is 1, which we don't have to write, because 1 times x squared is x squared. So we have x squared minus 25, negative 25 divided by 5 is 5. So minus 5, it's negative 5. X plus 14 equals 0. But because we didn't divide this by 5, where does that 5 go? Well, that 5 actually goes outside the parentheses. So the reason it goes outside the parentheses is because it's a factor of this term and this term. When it multiplies back into the parentheses and distributes itself with x squared and negative 5x, you get the same thing, which is 5x squared and negative 25x. So, now the next part is to make this a perfect square trinomial with the a value as 1, the b value as negative 5. So to find the c value, we have to do b over 2a squared. So b over 2a is squared is the c value that goes to make this a perfect square trinomial. So this becomes, the b value is negative 5 over, the a value is 1, and 2 times 1 is 2, squared is negative 5 over 2 is negative 2.5. Squared is equal to, negative 2.5 squared is equal to, let's put this into a calculator. Negative 2.5 squared is 6.25. So the c term is 6.25. So now let's write this here. 5 times, in parentheses, x squared minus 5x plus 6.25 plus 6.25 plus 14 equals 0. Now, because we added 6.25, we know that this equation is not the same as the original equation. So we have to somehow get rid of this. Well, a way to do that is subtracting it from the outside of the parentheses. Now, before we subtract it, let's first figure out what real value we added. The number that we put in was 6.25, but that's not the value that we added. The value that we added would be 5 times 6.25, because it's inside the parentheses, and when 5 gets distributed through the distributive property, this value is 5 times 6.25, which would be 5 times 6.25 is 31.25. So 31 minus 31.25 to get rid of this 31.25 that we're adding here. Now, it might seem a little useless to add the 6.25 here and subtract 31.25 here, because we're doing nothing. But this actually is a key step in completing the square. The reason it is a key step is because now we can convert it to vertex form, because this is a perfect square trinomial. So, in vertex form, we have a 0 is equal to, this a value comes down here, 5 times in parentheses x minus, now what goes here would be half of this, or what comes out here. So half of negative 5 is, as we know, negative 2.5, so minus 2.5 squared. This value is also the same value as just negative 2.5 here, which is b over 2a. So this value here is b over 2a. b, negative 5 over 2a, which is 2, which becomes negative 5 divided by 2 is negative 2.5. Then we close our parentheses and put a squared symbol. And then now we have to bring down this last part of the equation here. 14 minus 31.25 is negative 17.25, or just minus 17.25. Now, in this problem, we have to solve this. So when we mean by solve, or when we see the word solve, we need to find what the zeros are, or what x equals to. So to do that, we have to first add 17.25 to both sides. When we do that, we get 17.25 equals 5 times in parentheses x minus 25 squared. So now we have to get rid of this 5 here. To do that, we have to divide both sides by 5. 17.25 divided by 5 is 3.45. 3.45 is equal to, let's write that up here. 3.45 is equal to x minus 2.5, squared. Now the next part is we have to find the square root of both sides to get rid of the squared symbol here. So this becomes plus or minus the square root of 3.45 equals x minus 2.5. So now to get x by itself, we have to add 2.5 to both sides. So when we do that, we get 2.5 plus or minus the square root of 3.45. So the answer to this problem is x, or let's write this in a different color. x is equal to 2.5 plus or minus the square root of 3.45. 2.5 plus or minus the square root of 3.45. Now, we know that usually, when this is not a perfect square trinomial, that there is two x values, or two zeros. Now here, there is two zeros. The reason there are two zeros, is because there's plus or minus. So they create two different values when we add or subtract. So, the answer to this problem is x is equal to 2.5 plus or minus the square root of 3.45. Today we learned about completing the square. Thank you for watching this video.